Sarah, I'm here.
Excellent. Are you ready for me to start the broadcast, or do you want to hold tight for a second? Chair Gutierrez?
I'm ready if you're ready.
All right, let's do it.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello. I'd like to call this Santa Barbara Ordinance Committee meeting to order on June 30th, 2020. Madam Clerk, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Councilmember/Member Jordan?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Member Snedden, I don't believe is on the webinar yet, and Chair Oscar Gutierrez.
Present. Thank you. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Chair, there are no changes to the agenda.
Okay. Hello, Mayor Pro Tem Snedden. Let the record reflect that she is present.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I'd like to reopen the, now we have general public comment. So if there's any comments that want to be addressed to the Ordinance Committee that is not on the agenda, I believe this is the time to do it. Madam Clerk.
Chair Gutierrez, there is one speaker, Matthew Beausoleil, who has raised his hand right now. So I will call on him. One moment. Mr. Beausoleil, you have 3 minutes. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, we hear you.
Excellent. Hi, Chair Gutierrez and the rest of the council members. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Matt Beausoleil. I'm current president of AIA Santa Barbara, and I'm also a longtime resident of Santa Barbara. Like my father, I was born and raised here, and like my daughter as well. She's a year and a half, and that's part of the reason why I'm here to speak to you today, is because housing availability is an important issue to me, not only as an architect, but as a resident of Santa Barbara that has my family here. I want my daughter to have the opportunity to live here in town with her family in the future, like I currently have. And I see housing as a primary gateway to that. I haven't always lived in Santa Barbara my whole life. I went to college down Los Angeles. I lived down there for quite some time. And I lived in downtown LA before I moved back to Santa Barbara a few years ago. And so some of these things that we're looking at and you're looking at closely today, like reductions for parking through the new AUD ordinance, not having to have a patio, the outdoor living space is part of this program. A lot of these things were practiced, in the area when I lived down in downtown LA, and that was just a part of life. Also, the reduction of the requirement for parking. When I moved to downtown LA, we sold one of our cars and I took public transportation. That was part of the life, and it was great. And when we needed to be outside, we didn't need a balcony or patio. We'd go to a park or we would be on the sidewalk, and it was just a part of life. So these things aren't like new concepts or great concepts. I mean, they're done in other urban areas around the world, I think pretty successfully, and I think could fit well here in Santa Barbara. When I moved back to Santa Barbara eventually, my wife and I were appalled at how hard it was to find housing for our family. We lived in her grandma's house for almost a year till we found a place that was adequate. Providing housing is a really important issue to me. It's an issue now that I'm realizing is about equity and opportunity, not just for me, not for my daughter, but for everyone. So that's why I want to say that I support the ordinances that the Planning Commission are supporting, and in particular around parking and outdoor space, and also density as well. I think these are all sound approaches. I can't speak for all of the members of our chapter, our AIA chapter, but I know that a majority, I think, also support it as well. So thank you. I appreciate your time and your listening.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, are there any other public comments?
Yes, Cassandra Ensberg. Cassandra Ensberg, you will have 3 minutes. I see you. Oh.
Sorry, let me just clarify that this is public comment for issues not on the agenda. So if you're discussing the AUD ordinance, we ask you to wait until after we get the staff report. But if it's an item that's something that's not on the agenda, then you can go ahead and continue.
Chair Gutierrez and Ordinance Committee, there are 2 persons with raised hands, Cassandra Ensberg and Brian Kernal. And Cassandra Ensberg, you have a couple of different logins here, so I'm going to, nope, Cassandra Ensberg lowers the hand, so we'll go to Brian. Brian, please go ahead.
I wanted to speak on the AUD ordinance, so I can wait till after staff report.
Thank you.
Chair Gutierrez and Ordinance Committee, that's all of the raised hands for the public comment for items not on the agenda.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Clerk. If we can have the staff report now, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Gutierrez and committee members. So we have continued this item from our last Ordinance Committee meeting where we gave you a full report on this. And I think it would be best to just give you a quick update or a reminder of the amendment components that we have. So if we could pull up slide 12 of the PowerPoint from our last meeting, I can just go over the amendment components for you. And while Mr. Four is doing that, I can start. So the first component of these focused amendments on the Central Business District is in regards to the density. And so the proposal before you today is to increase the density in the CBD to hard density with the priority housing overlay in the majority of the Central Business District. The next component is in regards to building height. The request before you is to increase the height limit to 48 feet from 45 feet in the Central Business District on properties in the priority housing overlay and also in the CG and NC zones. The next is in regards to the open yard requirement. We carried forward from the Planning Commission an exemption for properties in the Central Business District between Chapala and Anacapa Streets, including the adjacent properties on both sides of the street from any open yard requirements. The next is in regards to parking, and parking has 2 components before you today. The first is to allow unbundled parking, which is allowing the parking to be leased separately from the rental housing unit in the Central Business District. And the second parking component is to require a maximum of 1 on-site parking space per unit in the Central Business District. And this was instead of the in lieu program. And then the final amendment component today before you is in regards to the trial period. And it's to eliminate all language associated with the trial period from the AUD program as shown in your attachment A, strike through an underlined ordinance. And so with that, that concludes my presentation on what we're here before you today. And we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have later. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. I would now like to open the floor to my colleagues. Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. So I have two questions at this point. One is the amendment components that aren't listed on here is that striking section 1, which I'm completely opposed to. So I'm actually happy to not see it here, but I just want to make sure that that didn't get that it got addressed. So if you could speak to that, and then also just a little more detail on the parking. So we've gone back and forth parking. We wrangled with parking at Planning Commission, and Councilmember Jordan, maybe you could speak to that. And then it came to council, and we had the joint meetings, and the parking went back and forth. And this seems like instead of expediting what we already agreed on, this seems like a new proposal out of Planning Commission. And if you could really highlight what the differences are. I mean, this seems to me like yet again another push for less, and I'm interested in how that happened and why are we even considering it here, I guess would be my question.
Mr.
Yes.
Date? Oh, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, let's let Rob answer the parking question first, and then I'll take the first question.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Council Member Sneddon, yeah, that's a really, really good question. So in watching the Planning Commission deliberate and the discussion that was going on in the meeting, there was a lot of discussion about how this is an incentive. So the whole purpose of the parking is to incentivize development. One of the things that the Planning Commission talked about is that if we have an in lieu fee, if there's a fee, that in fact it might not turn out to be an incentive. So the purpose of their changing, and the other thing they were told by the attorney's office is that they were not allowed to make a recommendation about the in lieu fee. There's kind of some nuances about the state, the in lieu fee and how it's done, and then that's a council member role. And so they were directed not to talk about the fee. And I think what they ended up doing is saying, okay, well, let's not recommend the fee at all. Let's recommend a parking maximum where there is no fee. And so that's kind of where they were going. I will tell you that, since we've got Jason Harris with us as an economic development manager, he came from Santa Monica, and ironically, they implemented an in lieu fee a while ago. They, interestingly enough, implemented a fee that was the $15,000 parking space that was the city council was discussing, and they got no traction on that. They only had one proposal. So it turned out not to be an incentive for Santa Monica. So that is kind of, maybe what people are thinking. There are options to that, to getting to the same place the Planning Commission is going with. One of the options is to have an in lieu fee and then just not charge for it initially to see how much of an incentive it is, use it as a throttle piece. So that's one thing the council can do with the Planning Commission's recommendation. I will tell you that just to explain it, the parking maximum, the way that works, right now we have parking minimums. So the developer is required to provide a minimum number. And in that case, the AUD today, that's one space with no guest parking. So it's one space. So when you take the minimum and then you flip it on its head and say, now we have a maximum, and the recommendation from Planning Commission was a one space maximum. What that means is the developer has flexibility to provide up to one space per unit, but they can also provide none or something below that. The other thing I will tell you that we learned through the process and in talking with developers is that very, very few developers, if any, we haven't found any developers, at least the ones that we're talking to in town, that would be willing to provide zero parking. They don't think that right now is the time for that you can't just go out of the gate and go less than one down to zero. So there's the two projects that we have on State Street that are in the works right now, which is the Restoration Hardware site and the Staples site, are both providing about 50% of the parking, 50% of one or 0.5 spaces per unit.
Thank you. And that brings up actually a follow-up question to that is if those two, the Restoration Hardware and the Staples site that you are referring, those are repurposing. So can we look at parking differently as an incentive for repurposed sites versus new construction of an AUD? And
Mr. Chair and Council Member Sned, so I would characterize, I think the language you're using about repurposing or redevelopment, I think is the situation we'd find anywhere in downtown. I guess you could argue that the location on the Staples parking lot is repurposing of a parking lot, but anything you do downtown is going to be a repurposing.
not a tear down and a rebuild? I mean, if you take a site.
Oh,
and
I
you
see
tear
what
it
you're
down,
saying. You
then-
mean like tearing down a building, like the Restoration Hardware building in this case would be a tear down. They tear down that and then they build on that building site, and then it kind of turns in an L. The property's an L onto Ortega where there is a parking lot. So from that regard, what are you asking specifically?
Yeah, I'm asking if you're repurposing a building and it was originally commercial and wasn't built to have parking for residential, that maybe we could incentivize that we have a parking maximum if you're doing repurposing of a building. But if you're doing new construction and can allot the site or bundle parking or unbundle parking, then that could be a different situation. And is that something that we could consider?
So Mr. Chair, Council Member Sneddon, I see what you're saying. I think that is something to consider. I think what we've been hearing is, at least initially, where we're plowing this new territory of less than one in terms of parking and creating an incentive, that what the development community has been saying is provide the most flexibility to try to get to the finish line on the project. So I think that in the vein of answering that question, you would want to look to something that's flexible initially and see what traction you get. And then in the adaptive management style, coming back a year or two later and saying, okay, so, and planning does this with the Planning Commission and Council in the joint sessions, here's how it's going. Do we need to adjust course based on the traction or the non-traction that we're getting? So I think it would be staff's advice to, and I think you heard this from the Planning Commission, is to try to incentivize, try to keep the incentive high to see if we can reach the barrier where we're actually getting developers coming forward with development.
Okay, and then just one more follow-up to that. In the staff report, it says that this recommendation is sort of counter to what staff's recommendation was and would be, and if you could highlight why, what it is that is the issue.
Great question. So Councilmember Sneddon, we were following council's lead with the in lieu fee, and that's why we were proposing that. And I think that everyone's been saying that we're just trying to stay in the lane that was carved out. And I think what Planning Commission's doing is they're paying attention to everything that's going on downtown in real time. And they're saying the lane you were in doesn't fit with where the tea leaves of downtown and what's going on with COVID and the things that are in developers' minds. And so they're trying to find their way. And so that's reasonable. The staff recommendation was to, do what we've been talking about for a long time.
So their recommendations on a couple different points are outside the scope of what council sent to Planning Commission to expedite.
It's in need of variation.
Okay, thank you.
And then Chair Gutierrez and Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, just to add on to that really quickly also, parking maximums weren't a new concept. We did discuss that at the Planning Commission meetings that we held in October and November, and it just wasn't moved forward by the Planning Commission back in 2019. And then to add to your other question in regards to Section 1, so the Planning Commission felt that they needed to strike Section 1 out of the ordinance attachment 1 of your council agenda report because it talked about things that weren't specific to the central business district. Both staff and legal counsel disagreed with that. And so in the attachment that you have, section 1 still resides. And we find that that is a very important component to making sure we honor council's direction to look at possible down zones in the future.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a couple questions to start off, and that is from staff a technical question on open yard or open space. If it is proposed on a roof area, is that a given by right area that can make the project comply with the requirements, or is it subject to design review issues?
Councilperson Jordan and Chair Gutierrez, Mr. Four, if you could go to slide 5 of the slide deck. This shows what is currently required by code. So each multi-unit house has to have both common area and private open space. So that first bullet is either the private open yard and the common open space of 15 feet by 15 feet. Or if you have certain findings made by your design review board, you can opt for just 15% of the lot area with a minimum of 20 feet by 20 feet. So the second bullet you can apply for, but it's not by right, it's by subjective standards.
And do you remember what some of those standards are? Is it an easy path or a difficult path?
I don't know exactly what the specific findings are for that, but I'm assuming that just having one more hearing you might not have normally if you were doing the project by right. The development committee or community would say that that adds time and uncertainty to the process.
Okay. And then my other question had to do with the same topic, open yard or open space, in regards to a single parcel or combined parcels. Same rules, right? I mean, if I have a single parcel of 15,000 square feet, it's this same math. And if I combine parcels to get two 15,000 parcels to 30,000, it's the same math. Is that correct?
Chair Gutierrez, Councilmember Jordan, yes, that's correct.
All right, that's all the questions I have. Thank you so much so far.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. Thank you, Ms. Metzer. Madam Clerk, I believe we are ready for public comment.
Very good. We do have a number of members of the public who have logged on. If you did wish to speak on this item, if you're logged on to the webinar and did wish to speak, please raise your hand within the app. You can also send me a question through the app and let me know you want to talk, and I will grab you in that case. Okay, we have for public speakers, Cassandra Ensberg, Anna Marie Gott, Alan Bildstein, Fred Sweeney, and John Campanella to start. Brian Cornell, I see you're offline. If you would like to come back, we will call on you. I know you mentioned earlier your wish to speak. Okay. Cassandra Ensberg, you have 3 minutes. Please go ahead. Cassandra Ensberg, please go ahead. Ms. Ensberg, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Boy, this technology is something, isn't it? My name is Cassandra Ensberg, and I guess it's still good morning, Chair Oscar Gutierrez, Councilwoman Snedden, and Councilman Jordan. My name is Cassandra Ensberg, and I'm an architect here in Santa Barbara and resident for over 30 years, and also the co-chair of the AIA Advocacy Committee. However, today I'm here just to speak for myself. And I just would like to say that to just remind everyone that this is about housing, which is about everything, health, justice, and equality. I am very appreciative of the work by the Planning Commission that they are responsible for. They have dug into all of this at their hearing that they had on June 4th. I think that if we are serious about all of these issues, then we must move forward with these amendments to incentivize housing in our downtown. It's a very big and very needed change that, of course, causes the important discussions we are having now as a community. I just want to share the following basic realities that help me to keep focused on the importance of affordable housing and housing in general. Why should we be approving these amendments, the downtown focus package? I would say that anyone who has issues with the multi-unit housing that we have realized since the inception of the AUD program, please realize what we got is a direct result of the current ordinance, the very ordinance that we are now working to fix with these amendments. These amendments are critical steps forward to begin to take the tourniquet off and let the life and energy flow into our downtown. Adding the priority overlay to remove the donut hole is essential. The other thing I think about is how to get affordable. And all I can say is the more difficult equals more cost equals higher rent. Our process is confusing and filled with uncertainty. We see this and we need to fix it. And why is this important now? Well, I would just refer you all to our Santa Barbara homelessness, the Santa Barbara housing inventory costs by level, the arena numbers, the California law, the grand jury report, and the Novak report. Please be confident and support the thorough work of your Planning Commission and support these amendments moving forward to City Council on July 28th. Thank you for your important leadership for all of us. Much appreciated. Have a great day.
Our next speaker is Ellen Bildstein, then Fred Sweeney, then John Campanella, then Brian Kernall. Ellen Bildstein, please go ahead.
Hello, Chair Gutierrez and the other members of the Ordinance Committee. I also am part of the AIA Advocacy Chair group. There are 3 of us who have that up. As a local architect, being involved in issues surrounding a greater amount of housing in the downtown is a really critical focus for our community. And we feel very, very strongly in favor of the number of AUD amendments that are being proposed and that are before you. I'd like to focus today just on parking, just since that is such an incredibly important aspect of being able to providing housing. Back when 2011, when we did the AIA charrette to assist with figuring out aspects that then ultimately turned into AUD policy, we learned very quickly how important the level of parking requirement is in terms of these sorts of projects downtown being possible to pursue and then being ones that will be realized and will get built. Reducing from 1 bedroom to 1 parking space to an entire unit per parking space was the difference that made AUD actually a successful program in terms of getting housing built in our community. We face that same dilemma again now that we're in the real heart of downtown and looking at parcels like similar to ones that I own downtown that are all of 20 feet wide. There is no way you could provide parking on a tiny little lot. And there are lots of them right in the heart of downtown. And so the importance of us having parking maximums instead of parking requirements unbundling parking from the creation of housing contributes to the affordability of those units and acknowledges the fact that those who would choose to live downtown also are likely to be people who might not need the ownership of a car in the first place. And it might be the difference between someone being able to live in one of the units that we will have the opportunity to build versus not allowing that to be a possibility for individuals in our workforce community. Really love where we're going with the parking direction and very much in favor of all the AUD amendments before you. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Fred Sweeney. Fred Sweeney, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Gutierrez and Council Jordan and Sneddon. I just wanted to let you know I'm listening and watching and hope that you take into account the importance of doing this work to get us housing that we need, but make sure that we think about that this housing needs to be affordable. And I think that I gave you testimony last week about the height issues, et cetera. So I will leave it at that. I'm anxious to see that this moves forward. Thank you.
Our next speaker is John Campanella. John Campanella, please go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Gutierrez and the Ordinance Committee members. I want to cover 2 points quickly, and that is in regard to the expiration of the AUD program, which Planning Commission recommended not expire, and I agree. The no net loss law in California requires that the jurisdiction maintain adequate sites to accommodate its remaining unmet RHNA by each income category at all times throughout the entire planning period. Our planning period currently ends December 31, 2023. If the city is proposing to possibly downzone properties in the current planning period, it would also have to show the possibility that the upzone properties, whatever you select, could also produce housing by December 31st, 2023. The problem is our program expires August 31, 2021. So I don't think there's any way that you're going to show no net loss to the state where the program might expire, variable density will take over, and that effectively would be a down zone of your high-end priority properties. So I really feel you should consider the Planning Commission recommendation to not let the program expire on August 31, 2021, and pass that on to the City Council. The second one is, we talk a lot about repurposing of commercial buildings, but I'd like you to consider the pass on to the City Council that immediately we should allow buildings to be repurposed to residential. We should not have to wait 6 or 9 months or even a year to find out if changes in density or FAR would allow it. The buildings are ready now and they need to be filled up. Otherwise, they're going to continue to be made available for non-residential use. And hotels. We now have hotels filling in buildings that our AUD program would not give enough density to at this time to allow it to be economically feasible to infill. So housing is at it's at a disadvantage to other commercial uses at this time. You can remedy that very quickly by allowing property owners to start repurposing their buildings immediately. If they are filling up what's there, they should be allowed to fill it up with residential, however that would fit in the building. So I think that really give people encouragement to go forward rather than waiting and in the meantime have to lease it for non-residential use. Last item, if I can, I would like Ms. Metzger maybe to clarify a little bit whether the discretionary meeting that's required on open yard just pertains to multifamily and does not pertain to commercial projects where you would have it by right. I'd like that clarified so we are clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Brian Kernall, then Clay Aurel, then Anna Marie Gott, Paul Belmont, and Detlev Pikert. Brian Kernall, I don't see your hand raised, but you did say you wish to speak, so please go ahead.
Okay. Chair Gutierrez, members of the Ordinance Committee, thanks for the opportunity. You know, this isn't our first amendment of AUD. We amended it to include the additional inclusion area. We, prohibited development of mobile home parks, that kind of thing. And I think that we need to face the reality that we're going to continue to amend this ordinance to get it right. So this is one more step, and it's critical to the downtown. It is critical to incentivizing housing. I want to talk about a couple of things. I sent you all an email to discuss height and open yard. I hope you read it. Just real quickly, as far as height is concerned, you know, I made the pitch, of course, in my email that I think even the 48 feet is too limiting, but I will tell you, we are doing the project. It's at the Staples building, and we cannot build it within 45 feet, period. And you know, what we need are developers to build these projects. It's interesting to me thinking about the RENA numbers that we're woefully behind on the RENA numbers. We only built 4 affordable units between 2015 and 2020. And this project alone at the Staples building would create 8 affordable units. It's a high risk for developers. We have to be able to give them enough incentive to build housing. So the height increase is essential. I think frankly, it should go to 60 feet, as I said in my email, but I won't belabor that fact. The bottom line is you can't build 4 stories in 45 feet. So we need flexibility. As far as the open yard is concerned, just to follow up on the point that Ordinance Committee Jordan indicated, the rules, the way they are now, are the limitation. And sorry for that. Have flexibility, for instance, being able to use the rooftop as allowed open yard area, then I think we're going to create a lot more opportunities. That's the problem right now. So this is not about eliminating open yard ability. It's really about tweaking the way that that is measured. So I don't think you need to worry about it, particularly in the downtown. There's going to be ample opportunities. So please stay the course. There's going to be more amendments, and look forward to continuing to work with all of you to ensure that we get the housing that we really need. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Snedden.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. I had a question for Mr. Kernall, if he's willing, or if he's still available.
Sure.
Oh, thank you. So I just, it's a genuine question about, so you've done these projects before. I can see one of them right out my window here. It does have parking, it does have open space, and it is in the height limit. And it did pencil out. I'm trying to understand how that worked for you.
Are you talking about the building at Anacapa and Ortega?
Yes.
Well, that building, I will tell you, that building is 2 stories over parking, so it's 3 stories. So again, I think the question of the 45 feet, as I indicated in my email, is that it was really put in place to limit 4-story buildings. We need the 4th story to really make these projects pencil. And I know that we've heard that before. The building at Anacapa and Ortega did not have the 10% affordability. I wish, frankly, that it had. The other piece of this is that it came very close to the 45 feet as a 3-story building. So I think it underscores the limitations of 45 feet for our downtown. I, like all of you, want to see the additional affordability. I think it is critical to making this work, but bottom line, we need units. We really need the inventory to be added. And by the way, on the Anacapa building, we actually did have a minor modification on the open space because it was built, on the open yard, because it was built property line to property line. The 20 by 20 that Jessica Metzger mentioned, that is all you can count on a roof deck. So I could have, in the case of the Staples project, I have 10,000 square feet of roof deck, which well exceeds the 15% I'm required, but I can't count it. I can only count a 20 by 20 area in it. So I think we can tweak those rules to make it work for everybody.
So if we could count more of the roof deck for the open yard.
Exactly.
Okay, it's just a fundamental question I have because I always hear it doesn't pencil out and then there's a project. And so do I conclude that that project didn't pencil out, or do I conclude, I'm not sure how to interpret that. And it's a genuine question. I hear a lot
No,
about
and
the
I think-
penciling out, but I
If I
see
may-
projects.
Yeah, if I may, it's a really, really good question. And I confess, I really struggled with what the rents were for that project. To me, and I think to everyone, they're exceptionally high. And I know there's concern that those aren't the kind of prices that we're looking for. If you talk to the developer, they will tell you that it is the cost of the project that drove the rents. It was a very expensive project. So this issue of making projects pencil is a very challenging one. And I'll tell you, there's developers in town that I think it would be really good to have an engaged conversation with about it. Peter Lewis, who we're doing the Staples project with, it would be very enlightening to understand the constraints that he is faced in order to actually build a project like that.
Thank you for indulging my questions there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Our next speaker is Clay Orell, then Anna Marie Gott, Paul Belmont, Detlef Pikert, and Amy Tripp. Clay Orell, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. I guess we're in afternoon time now, but thank you, council members and ordinance committee members. I'm Clay Orell. I'm an architect with AB Design Studio here in town. And I'm also part of the advocacy committee with the AIA and a past AIA president and a past ABR board member. So I want to just kind of follow up on some of the points that were already made. I definitely agree with the idea that there should not be an expiration to the AUD program, as John Campanella stated. Certainly, this housing issue isn't going to be solved in the short term. It's going to be a long-term issue that we're going to continue to be battling and dealing with. The other point that I really wanted to bring up was really around the height. Height issues are really critical to being able to increase density and get more affordable housing stock in the city. As Brian was mentioning with his project on Anacapa and Ortega, a project like that with another floor probably could have had some affordability included in it. And that is really the part that is needed to really make these projects quote unquote pencil, but also to get more affordable housing in this town. We lose employees constantly that move out of town because they can't afford it. I know other architects do, I know other industries do, and it's just a fact. And 48 feet isn't enough. I'm going to second Brian here. This reduction to 45 feet was done during the general plan update, probably erroneously in my humble opinion, and it should never have happened. But it's there, and so we need to deal with it. But housing projects that are considered a community benefit housing project are deemed that, are allowed to go up to 60 feet. And I think that we should push for an automatic designation for projects that are providing housing in the downtown. You want to solve the downtown problem, the downtown retail, the stores, the shops, everything else, you have to put people down there. And in order to do that, we need to have levers and dials that we can use as architects working with our clients to help them get projects in the downtown that are both appropriate for downtown and provide affordable housing. So I would push heavily for an automatic designation of community benefit housing projects for any housing projects in the downtown core and allow them to exercise the right to go to 60 feet. I think that's really important part of the work that we're doing here. So I agree with all the other comments related to parking and so on, and thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Anne Marie Gott, then Paul Belmont, Detlef Pikert, Amy Tripp, and Tony Tomasello. Anne Marie Gott, please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Council. Councilmember Snedden, if you want to know why projects pencil out, I would really recommend that you require pro formas for every single project, and you will see how well some projects pencil out compared to others. If you're worried about the 48 feet, just go ahead and have some grading done. You can go down 3 or 4 feet and have no worries about a 48-foot tile building not being able to be at least 4 feet, up to me, 4 stories. I would really, though, recommend that you just terminate the trial for AUD. It's never provided us with affordable housing. It has only supersized the costs of land because of how the AUD went ahead and increased density without requiring the affordable housing. I would really urge you to also have a meeting on the state bonus density law, because I believe that with the AUD concessions that you've already put in this particular ordinance during a trial, as well as all of the additional freebies in terms of parking and setback modifications and height increases in heights that some of these projects get, I think it's counter to the state bonus density law, which says that you're not supposed to do anything to frustrate the development of using this law. We haven't had this law used in a substantial period of time before AUD was actually passed, and that was 2013. And as far as the moderate income housing units for the AUD, those 4 were only found as a flaw in another project and were not even part of an AUD project. So I would really suggest that you've had 0 actually developed under the AUD program. Regarding parking minimums, they should still be required. Everyone needs parking. I don't think there's any one of you that really does believe that our residents here in Santa Barbara don't need a vehicle. And we also have to think about this. Who are we building for with the AUD? We're not building for our residents that currently live here. We're building for future residents. And what that tells me is that we need to stop catering to tourist businesses and developments. And we need an actual plan for the city, a plan to bring in higher wage jobs that are actually going to be able to then support these units. More importantly, though, in all of this, I think this really needs to go back to the drawing board because of the requirements for open space that really are needed, especially in this time of COVID. And we really do need to make sure that our commercial space is only on the bottom floor and not above residential. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Paul Belmont. Paul Belmont, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez and Ordinance Committee members. I just wanted to speak today to support the proposed ADU amendments. I'm technically a millennial. I'm a principal of a local engineering firm located in downtown, serve on the board of directors of the AAA, and a member of the community. Most all the team members here at my office of 12 have at one time or another complained about the lack of housing downtown and their desire to live downtown. I believe adopting these amendments is a good step forward. And, you know, half of my office actually try to ride their bikes to work and enjoy riding their bikes to work. And so I do believe that the parking would be acceptable to the younger generation that predominantly lives downtown and works in the downtown community here. That's all. Thank you.
Next speaker is Detlef Pikert. Detlef Pikert, please go ahead. This is Detlef Pikert. Please go ahead. try on one other call. Detlev Pikert, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Gutierrez and committee members. My name is Detlev Pikert. I'm an architect here in Santa Barbara, and I've been working in Santa Barbara practicing for the last 38 years. I'm also co-chair of the AIA Advocacy Committee, along with Cass Ensberg and Ellen Bilson. I really want to thank you and your staff for your hard work on these critical amendments to the AUD ordinance. Tremendous amount of effort has gone in to debate, deliberations, discussion over these past few months, and that work is now coming to fruition. The work of your committee is critical to the success of these AUD amendments, and more importantly, it's really critical to the long-term economic vitality and sustainability of our central business district and our entire community. We have a statewide housing crisis that negatively affects every community in California, including Santa Barbara. We have an economic crisis caused by the global pandemic that affects every aspect of life and threatens to change the way we live now and long into the future. Our downtown businesses are in crisis, not just due to the pandemic, but due to the very nature of how we purchase the things we need and how we interact with the businesses in our downtown. These changes and those that are coming require a new vision for our community, and particularly for our central business district. Passage of the proposed AUD amendments is the beginning of a process that is responsive to those needs, to the needs of this moment, and that hold the promise of providing the setting for the long-term sustainability and economic vitality of our city. The Planning Commission, after much analysis, debate, discussion, deliberation, passed on to you its recommendations for the passage of the AUD amendments. As an individual and co-chair of the AIA Advocacy Committee, I fully support those Planning Commission recommendations. Furthermore, as reflected in the letter sent to you by AIA-SB President Matt Beausoleil, the architect members of AIA overwhelmingly support these recommendations as well. I know there are a couple of issues that are still under discussion. And I wanted to mention something about the 45 to 48 foot height limit recommendation. I want to make it clear it's possible to build 4 stories in 45 feet, but not in mixed use buildings. The challenge is proposed by forcing 4 stories into 45 feet result in poorly designed buildings. We're designing buildings for people to live in for the next 75 to 100 years. It would be extremely short-sighted to lock in bad design, poor quality living environments, and dysfunctional commercial spaces for the entire useful life of a building. I've attached for your reference a couple of building sections to show the minimum acceptable floor heights and other considerations. Please review the document. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions regarding that. Thank you for your attention.
Our next speaker is Amy Tripp, then Tony Tomasello, then Karen Hickman. Amy Tripp, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Chair Gutierrez and the Ordinance Committee members. My name is Amy Tripp. I'm also part of the AIA Advocacy Committee. I was also a former ABR board member, and I've lived and worked downtown for the past 13 years. I have a great interest to see the community improve, especially in the central business district. There is a great need for housing, and this is the location for that higher density housing that we do need. We need more residents in this area to really activate this location. Right now, it's pretty vacant. There's so many shops that have been vacant for so long, and supporting these amendments are really going to help improve this area and bring more housing. And just to echo the issue of height and changing from 45 feet to 48, it will allow for better living conditions within the denser housing that we do need. And so I fully support the AUD amendments and encourage you to also support the recommendations coming from the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Tony Tomasello. Tony Tomasello, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Gutierrez and members of the committee. My name is Tony Tomasello. I'm a land use planner with RRM Design Group. I'm a board member of the Coastal Housing Coalition, and I'm also a millennial and a young professional. And as a young professional, I know firsthand how difficult it is to find adequate housing in Santa Barbara. My wife and I both work. She's an ER nurse, and together we make a great living, pretty squarely in the 150 to 200% AMI. But despite this, we consistently cannot find rental housing in Santa Barbara that we can afford and allows us to adequately save and plan for our futures. I believe the expansion of the priority housing overlay in Santa Barbara's downtown area and the Associated Planning Commission recommended amendments will help facilitate housing in what is clearly the most appropriate and necessary location in Santa Barbara. I appreciate that living in Santa Barbara is not a right, rather it is a privilege. And my wife and I aren't alone. Countless incredibly hardworking people, including educators, police officers, architects, engineers, nonprofit sector professionals, service industry workers, and even the city's own staff work tirelessly to make it in Santa Barbara, contribute invaluably to the vitality and well-being of this community, and yet increasingly find it simply infeasible to live here and plan for a future in Santa Barbara. I follow local politics and as part of my profession and my passion, and I consistently hear the commitments and pledges all of you make on a regular basis about the critical need for housing in Santa Barbara to support people in the missing middle and young professionals, to stimulate the local economy, or to achieve our regional sustainability goals. Multiple third-party studies and reports have been provided to this council, corroborating that the housing need is dire and that the city needs significant reforms to facilitate its development. I believe the time is now, and the city can no longer continue to delay implementation of the proposed policy amendments that would help achieve our housing goals. I support Planning Commission recommendations and urge the committee to move swiftly to implement these policy amendments. Further, I believe the committee should recommend removing time limits to the AUD ordinance. Under state law SB 330, the city cannot impose a cap or limit on multifamily housing, and I understand enforcing the AUD expiration would constitute a violation of these provisions. Maintaining the expiration adds confusion and obfuscates your commitment to supporting housing development. Send a clear and strong message to downtown property owners who may not be sophisticated housing developers, but are interested in finding ways to bring in new revenues for their buildings given the state of commercial real estate along State Street. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Our final speaker is Karen Hickman. Karen Hickman, please go ahead.
Hi, Chairman Gutierrez and council members. I'm Karen Hickman. I'm a West Side resident and an owner of rental property, both commercial and housing. I'm a super senior, so I probably won't be moving downtown till a little bit later. But I want to encourage you to make downtown housing a priority now. It appears that a lot of good work has been done. And the fact that we've only built 4 units of affordable housing in the last, well, since 2015 indicates that it's not been a priority or it's been too difficult a priority. So I hope we're able to eliminate those trial periods and to repurpose those properties as soon as we can. Thank you.
Chair Gutierrez, that was the final public speaker.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'd like to open the floor to my colleagues. If you have any questions or comments, this is the time to make them. Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. So just in general, I have concerns after all the back and forth with meetings and the sort of careful consideration we did with the whole AUD package, that pulling out these portions, particularly the open yard, I have some issues with right now, but I do want us to give feedback on the items that are bulleted in slide 12, or is this a time for just general comments? I'll start with for the density increases, you know, I want housing downtown. I want it to be affordable. So many of these things, I think, don't necessarily address that. I think we're trying to stimulate more construction with this package, but not necessarily in affordability. And I have just real concerns that once we incentivize it, if it doesn't have the affordability component, then I'm not sure what levers we have left to incentivize. So I'm for the building height, I as before, I mean, this is nothing different than when we had our joint discussion and talked about it. I'd like to stay at 45. But again, I'm willing to look at what we're getting if we get 48. So if it's higher ceilings, well, that maybe makes things more luxury units, which doesn't to me speak to affordability. If we're getting an extra floor, when I'm looking at the Anatega building out the window, I don't wish it was another floor high. And if it was, I would want that entire floor to be affordable. And so to that, I would say, well, why not just make a true community development project? If you want to go up to 48 feet, you might as well go up to 60 feet, and you might as well have it be a true community benefit project. So I'm not sure why we would keep incrementally going higher to have additional stories if we don't have a guarantee that that would then bring in more affordability. And if it just brings in one unit or one micro unit more of affordability, I'm not willing to make the trade-off for an extra floor. So there's that. The open yard requirement continues to be something that I just cannot support eliminating. I think we could eliminate it if you're repurposing a building. I would really, really like to incentivize repurposing buildings. We have so many store vacancies, so many open places that could be filled with housing and infill in there, and I would love to see that incentivized. If it was for something being repurposed, I think it's perfectly fine to not have a parking requirement, to not have an open yard requirement, to really be truly, truly flexible to make those be able to happen immediately. It's one of those things that I'm really in favor of, and that seems like a worthwhile trade-off to make that happen. But to be doing these for new construction, incentivizing, it seems like we just keep throwing more and more at the AUD to try and make it work. And I do see projects, and they don't, to me, seem like what the intention of the AUD was. And I've looked back in the general plan, it's in our staff report, and maybe this is something we'd have further discussion about, but in the general plan, that the AUD was intended to incentivize smaller, more affordable units. It's just not what we're getting with this program. So I'm a little bit weary that we've gone back and forth. It came back to Planning Commission. I certainly appreciate the hard work of the Planning Commission and the attention to detail. We've been doing that too. And we've also had lengthy meetings and joint meetings, and we came up with a package, then expedited portions of it. And I'm not comfortable that the portion that couldn't be expedited was the part that protected the historic districts, and that has to be put off. And I understand the reasons why, but it seemed to me it went back to Planning Commission, and then Planning Commission again wanted to make changes to the package, which happened the last time when it went to Planning Commission. It went with very specific scope of what to consider, and it came back with a lot of additions. And now it's gone back to Planning Commission. It's come back with further changes, including suggestions to delete a section. So I'm not inclined to, the direction from council was to expedite. And the direction to Planning Commission was to look at the whole package. So I don't think that we've approved as a joint meeting with council what those new recommendations are. So there's certainly things in the original meeting that I voted no on, but since council as a whole moved forward, then we could move those things forward expediting. But I'm really not comfortable with now, you know, by the way, we'll change the parking, and by the way, this is a different incentive than it was before, and we just keep throwing things at it to hope it pencils out. But I'm still not seeing the affordability downtown, but I want housing downtown. So I think 45 feet is fine. And if you want to do to 60 and do a true community benefit project, please do. That would be so welcome in the downtown to bring true community benefit. The open yard, I'm not going to, I'm not a fan of it being zero requirement unless it's for repurposing a building. That makes perfect sense to me. I think you could use roof spaces. We could make it smaller, make it 20 by 20, have roof spaces count for more. But this extension of the open yard, not having the open yard requirement into the middle of a block creates issues that we talked about last time, or that were brought up last time, about splitting the block. And if you have aggregate parcels, how do you split those? And is it just the street facing portion that gets the open yard exemption, or is it the mid interior block portion? So those are some of my thoughts right now. I guess this is still a trial program. I don't know if we're talking about eliminating ever the trial period or extending it. So our initial staff reports and discussions from when it was with us at council before was to extend it, but it wasn't to eliminate it. So now this seems like a different recommendation again. So I'm grappling with that. I'm grappling with the bigger scope that's been brought back to us, and I'm look forward to further discussion on that. But I think I would like to start talking in terms of some of these incentives being for repurposing buildings, like the eliminating the open yard requirement versus for new construction. And I'll pause there. Thank you. Chair Gutierrez, do you want us to all stay visible or just to come on when we are speaking? What works best for you?
During public comment, I'd appreciate if the public could see your faces. Other than that, you can come on when you need to speak, okay, so I can see the point of order.
Thank you.
I actually have a question that Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon just brought up for city staff. Is there a reason, or is there an ability to extend the AUD trial period? I somewhat remember that there's some reason why it's either we end it or we extend it, or yeah.
Chair Gutierrez, so in the original direction that staff received from City Council in 2019, we had eliminated the unit count as part of the trial period. And by eliminating that 250 unit count, it extended the trial period to August of 2021. And just a quick reminder, we plan to be through all of the amendments, both these expedited ones as well as the other amendments from the 2019 package by early next year. So before that date is reached.
Thank you for that. Mr. Jordan, I just got notified that there is a caller who has been waiting. Would you mind if we take that public comment? Thank you. Madam Clerk?
Yes, our speaker is Alex Pujo. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for letting me speak. I'm not sure if you remember the 6 years that led to the adoption of Plan Santa Barbara. Between 2005 and 2011, the plan underwent 50 County and Planning Commission hearings, plus innumerable workshops, subcommittee, ad hoc, and advisory board presentations. It was, by all accounts, the largest public outreach in the city's history. The AUD program was the love child of this plan Santa Barbara, delivered in 2013 after another round of council and PC interventions. Postpartum, there was an overabundance of pediatric care, and in 2017, the Housing Task Force met 11 times to review the child's progress. Recommendations were revisited jointly by PC and Council last year, and to top it all, at the 7.5-hour PC marathon on June 4th. The package in front of you is a thoroughly vetted set of amendments, absolutely necessary if you want to have a substantial amount of housing downtown, which is the environmentally superior location. It bears the overwhelming support of the Commission as a set, not as a cafeteria-style menu from which you pick, choose, or substitute. It's like a complete meal. The city needs to move forward instead of resisting change and mandates to build housing. Instead of protecting what is already here, it must think in terms of what could be here. The city's inactions carry a cost for those who cannot call Santa Barbara home. What I just read are not my words, but quote from the grand jury report. Creating a housing shortage and erecting barriers have profound social consequences. Inequity is when one group, older and whiter, has the leafy street with the picket fences, while another group, younger and darker, is crowded one family per bedroom on San Pascual, or commutes long hours from nowhere, or puts its dreams on hold forever. To put it even more bluntly, brown lives matter too. As Eldridge Cleaver wrote, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. At critical times, there are no innocent bystanders. We need to ask ourselves, on what side of history do we want to be? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of got some meandering notes I'm going to read off, and then I'll go through the 7 or 8 items. But one of the foundations of the ADU program, from my viewpoint the last 10 years, that was a failure, is that the program was adopted with a desire to have an adaptive management process. And while we have turned that into a once-a-year report at a joint council and planning commission meeting, the idea was that we would specifically look at this continually, constantly, revise it as things didn't work well, and replicate or improve on things that worked well. In reality, it's turned into a program, the ADU program has turned into a process that when you want to adjust it, it's like swimming through peanut butter, if you could possibly do that at all. So I think certainly from my perspective, one of the foundations that I'd like to see us get back to is that we need to look at the ADU program much more frequently, much more comprehensively, and take action, not just look at it. Regarding the comments about the Planning Commission changes to what was sent down to the Planning Commission, I would say again, based on my experiences, this is exactly what planning commissions are supposed to do. They're supposed to take direction from council to work on something and offer back their suggestions and recommendations from their perspective, from their scope, and from their reference. If we were only to send direction to planning commission to look at something, but you can only send back to us what we want to hear, that would be a disservice both to the process and to the members of the planning commission. And I also think, just to clear up that word about repurposing, I'd love to get people other than me or people other than Councilmember Snedden's opinion on what repurposing is and what it entails. I have a different view of that. I think it's generally a dead end, trying to use an existing building that's there. And that's because commercial building codes and residential building codes are markedly different. Any building that's in the downtown core that you would like to repurpose and go up would either be impossible from a structural standpoint, or the structural I believe the structural improvements would be so costly trying to maintain the existing structure that they would quickly negate any benefit you expect to get as you go up and add housing. The general direction I'm going in terms of the height too, just to address not getting, I'm agreeing wholeheartedly with not getting the type of housing we're getting. And Mr. Cornell's project down at the corner here, out the back window of Councilmember Snedden's office, is a great example. He stood up in front of Planning Commission and the design boards and said, this is going to be a great project. This is going to accomplish what we need. It obviously didn't. So we've had a 45-foot height restriction without jumping through hoops to ask for a community benefit project. Since we've had that 45-foot height restriction, we've also now burdened or added on the requirement of 10% inclusionary housing. So the playing field is, when you're talking about 45 plus give me 3 more feet because I have problems with running utilities, with first floor ceilings for retail, with good living spaces for the upper floors, we're not comparing apples to apples, because in the past we had no inclusionary requirements. Now we have the burden or the benefit, depending upon your viewpoint, of the inclusionary requirement that adds those units on there by requirement. And we've added the burden of that cost to the development while still maintaining the 45-foot ceiling, the 45-foot height limit. So I don't think you can have that conversation as an apples to apples conversation. I think what we're hearing back generally from the development community, it was already a problem when we didn't have the inclusionary requirement. And it's been made worse a problem by having that inclusionary requirement. So then I'll go down these items then that I think I've numbered 1 through 7. And the missing one in there for staff too is I am definitely going to take, I am definitely going to be in support of taking the city attorney's recommendation to leave in those findings and determination paragraphs that were struck out by the Planning Commission. If the city attorney feels that those have been vetted with HCD and are generally on the path of what they're going to accept, I am not going to upend that cart and dump everything out in the road. High density and priority housing overlay down in the CBD, totally in support of that. And I think we'll begin to see results from that, both in terms of housing where it needs to be, and obviously in the inclusion of 9 or 10 more units, if that's the number that will have required inclusionary housing. I'm in agreement with increasing the height to 48 feet for the reasons I said before. I also think that 3 feet when you're walking along the street or worried about a view is imperceptible to the average person. And it's just probably people that are historically used to having this argument that it is a number on a piece of paper, and once it's done out there in the street, I think the consequences won't be noticed. I'm kind of agnostic right now in the open yard requirements. I'm not happy that you can only do a certain amount of feet on the roof, as I see rooftops in the downtown area being both an amenity and a way to solve people's cry for open yard. I personally more believe that the open yard is the downtown, that's the living room of your area, and that the developers know best in when and how to put the open yard in in order to attract me, that I'm willingly not going to go to a place that's not inviting and open. But I think one of those options should be the roof. And so I would tend more to leave the open yard requirement where it is now. If we also agree to remove the 20 by 20 cap for rooftop open yard. But if we're not willing to do that, then I would prefer to remove the open yard requirements in their entirety in the area of the CBD as we're talking about. I also agree with the max of one on-site space for parking in this area and no minimum required. I feel that works hand in hand with where we're going with unbundled parking with eventual use of less than full city parking structures. And Planning Commission's inclusion of that is definitely what Planning Commission has been talking about for years. Every time parking has come up in a discussion at Planning Commission and what to do in the future has come up, this has definitely always been part of the discussion. You should not have to go through a modification process in the downtown for a couple parking spaces, for a couple units on top of an existing mixed use building, which is exactly what's happened in the last year or two. And they have unanimously been passed, maybe not unanimously, let's say 6-1, I'll be safe, at the Planning Commission level. So I agree that the downtown resident of tomorrow is either carless or will use alternative transportation such as ride sharing, public transit, or will find ways to find their parking space through a variety of paying more for a parking space that's existing, using a city facility, or some other method that we don't even know about. I also agree with the Planning Commission's recommendation to just stop the sunsetting of the AUD ordinance, to allow it to continue, and again, continue to make improvements as we see they're needed, make replications of successes as we see those happen, and truly work in an adaptive management component for the continuation of the ordinance as it exists. And I think I've gotten them all, and somebody can remind me if I hadn't. So those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. Councilmember Jordan, I had 2 clarifying questions for you, just about, I just want to make sure I understand. And thank you for laying that out. I think it's really valuable to us, your long history with Planning Commission and now as liaison, so I really appreciate your perspective. When you said the max 1 for parking, were you in support of with an in lieu fee or no for that one?
Let me follow my notes. I think this replaces the in lieu fee. My experience with in lieu fees generally is I can't think of a in lieu fee that the city has had that has led to something and where you had enough fees to do something with. And I think it's an in lieu fee is simply counterproductive because the parking, if there's a parking demand, it will still need to be worried about in some format of unbundling, finding a different parking space. And I think the foundation is just like Mr. Cornell said, or somebody said, that nobody's going to build these without parking spaces. They're going to build them with parking spaces to meet the market. But those, if the Jordans are moving downtown, we're going to have 2 cars. And I need the flexibility of the city to figure out where I'm going to put my other car that's a reasonable flexibility rather than just being a jerk and going out and playing the 90-minute hop or parking it in an existing neighborhood. And I see that as a component from both the developer side and the tenant side and the city side to have total flexibility in how that's going to work out. And again, the key to me is adaptive management. If you see something going wrong, you don't wait 2 years after a task force is formed and meets to try and work out some things. We make a commitment to working on these things as we see problems and we make changes, or as we see successes.
And then would you, just 2 questions about that too. Would you be in favor of initially waiving the fee and seeing what that does to the number of proposals with the idea of upping the fee later, and that maybe incentivize people to move sooner to get that going, or no?
So I guess if you were really excited about a fee, I'd say, okay, as long as the other components were also an option for the developer. So sure, you want to do an inland fee? Great. But we're also only going to probably going to get Rob on and make sure I'm not boxing myself into a corner. To me, I want the option of more rather than less of that. I just don't want an in lieu fee being in place of a maximum of 1 on per site space. I'm willing to figure out a way that if you think an in lieu fee is important and somebody wants to do an in lieu fee, great. But would you also have the ability to only put one max site per unit? Rob, are you going to save me here? I hope a little bit, because we've had this talk about flexibility, and I'm okay with anything that's on this page and any requirement or allowance, but I'd like to see them, all of those allowances or all of those requirements together as a menu for the developer to pick from based on who he's targeting, where his location is geographically compared to other available parking or city parking stock, and what he thinks the market will bear.
Mr. Chair, council members, I think what I'm being asked of is there a compromise or a shared way to move forward between parking maximums and in lieu fee? I think that there is. I think the way you would do that, under the in lieu fee, a developer could require down to 0. So it's very similar to a parking maximum. The only difference is there's not a ceiling on that requirement. The parking maximum puts a ceiling to where you'd need a parking modification to provide more than 1 per unit. So what you could do is you could say, provide an in lieu fee with a maximum of 1 space provided per unit. And then I think what the council members are saying is that, and then you would also set that fee at 0 initially, and that would have the same outcome as the parking maximum. There would be 0 fee for going down to 0 because you don't have a fee in place for it. And then I think the only reason you do that, just to say it, if someone's watching, because I think I understand what's going on in your minds, but just to say it, the only reason you would do that is you're saying we want to throttle up and encourage and have the incentive for development. But if it gets too much, or there's this onslaught of we could throttle it down by making the fee go up.
Does that make sense to me?
Chair, Gutierrez, may I ask some further questions there? Thank you. So the in lieu fee, one of the reasons that I don't know if the term excited about, but think that it's important is I think we were talking about it going into a housing fund and that being used toward affordable housing, and what happens with those in lieu fees. I guess that's an important part of the discussion. I think it was, if we're going to incentivize housing downtown and then there is that in lieu fee, what would that be used for?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Sten, that is a really good clarification to ask about. So the in lieu fee would be used for parking system improvements and access to downtown, not specifically for housing. And that is by rule. So, and it sounds like, well, the attorneys came on and off, but that is the exclusive use of that money not for housing purposes, but for parking and access downtown.
Thank you. Okay, so then on that point, oh, I'm sorry.
Chair Gutierrez, council members, and I just wanted to clarify the under the Mitigation Fee Act, the impact created by whatever the fee is for needs to be mitigated specifically. So that's why we've tried to make it, when we did craft the language for the in lieu fee, somewhat broad to allow for multiple uses with regards to our parking and infrastructure, but we couldn't apply it to affordability.
Okay, thank you.
But isn't one of the purposes of that also that if I'm going to pay an in lieu fee, and there's a need then to offer me a system of transportation other than my car, so it would also go to multimodal improvements on the street, such as bike lanes or other types of improvements. Isn't that part of the theory also?
Yeah, Chair Gutierrez and Councilmember Jordan, yes, and that's why we tried to make the language as broad as possible for it to be allowed for that kind of transportation needs.
Thanks. Thank you. Then sorry to butt in there. I just wanted to make sure I knew what I was talking about in lieu fees too.
Okay, and then Chair Gutierrez, may I ask another clarifying question of Councilmember Jordan, and then I have some concluding thoughts there. So,
yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Jordan, when you said leave the open yard, you said leave it as is. And so were you referring to as is pre the package, or as is eliminating it, or which as is? It's been very much in flux.
So in my conversations, I see development on downtown State Street, mixed-use development, having a lot of flat roofs, have a lot of flat roof space. In fact, Mr. Cornell, I think, referred to as he's got one with 10,000 square feet, but he can only use 20 by 20 of that and meet his open yard requirements under the current regulations. So when I meant leave as is, I said I'd be willing to talk about leaving as is the current regulations, not what you're seeing from Planning Commission as a recommendation.
Not
eliminating it, leaving this current requirements in, but only if you can accomplish more on the rooftop. You're not restricted to just that 20 by 20. So if you need 2,000 feet on your 10,000 foot rooftop, you have the option as a designer to build that in and figure out where it is, and that's allowed, rather than I can only do 400 square feet up there, but I need 1,600 more square feet, and I don't see a way to build it in. That would be one way I could go backwards on the Planning Commission recommendation.
I'm completely in favor and really appreciate that, the opportunity to keep some type of open yard requirement, but being more flexible in how that requirement is being met. Is that amenable to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm very, very much in favor of that. And think that extending it beyond the midline of the street creates all kinds of additional issues, which we may want to look at later, but not in this expedited package. So keeping it as is, also the recommendation as is to the midline of Anacapa and Chapala, rather than going out to the block end of that.
If you're gonna read that whole part, and then I was just talking about square footage, I'm kind of agnostic on that. I mean, I'm in favor of Planning Commission's recommendation that way until I hear from somebody on the parcel on Santa Barbara Street or Bath or De La Vina, whatever the other one behind Chapala, that's got a new 4-story building with a rooftop deck only looking down on their house. I mean, I get that. You're transitioning off of what I'd call clearly a commercial frontage on Chapala or Anacapa into another side of the street where it's bordering on its back, east and west, into a residential neighborhood. So I'd be willing to give up that recommendation too. I'm agnostically concerned about it. So.
Okay. Thank you. So then, Chair Gutierrez, just for some final, I don't know if if staff needs further direction for this, but I do have a question about this repurposing, and I think we maybe have different opinions on it, but I would welcome if staff could come back with, if we have ordinances in place that are prohibiting the repurposing, or if it's as Councilmember Jordan says, a dead end, and I see Ms. Brooke has turned her light on, if that's okay to explore that for a moment.
Ms. Brooks?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Gutierrez and Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to hop in and just offer a little bit more perspective on repurposing or reuse. Adaptive reuse is a term that's often referred to. And there are, we do have policies in the general plan that encourage that. And so far, it's been hard to build in many more development incentives than we already have into the AUD program to encourage reuse of existing space. Some building and fire code requirements can make that challenging. Sometimes just how the structure was built can make that challenging, but we'd certainly be open to exploring other ideas that council members have about incentivizing that. And you could do it in a number of ways. We've talked about how the open yard and parking flexibility could allow, more likely allow some reuse of existing buildings, because some of them obviously are non-conforming to today's standards. There's other ways we could look into doing that too, if that's something that we're directed to do in the next package of AUD amendments, or as we look forward to amending multi-unit development standards next year. I'm open to any of that direction, and if you have more questions, feel free to let me know.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Brooke. So I think on that note, I'll just go back down the recommendations again. For density, increased density in the CBD, yes. With the building height, I would say if we are, to me, that the building height and the open yard and the FAR are all tied together. I mean, I think that's what we're attempting to address with the FAR, which is coming in the next part of the package. So I just don't know that building height gets us any more affordability or more open yard. But if we're getting open yard that can be on rooftops, now you're talking about 48 feet and then rooftop decking on top of that. The 3 feet really only matters to me if that means all of a sudden you can have 4 stories instead of 3 stories, which it sounds like that might be the limiting factor, even though it's only 3 feet. It's that limiting 3 feet that is the difference between a whole nother story being added or not. So I'm not in favor of increasing the building height until we have the rest of the package with the FAR. I think those go hand in hand to me, the entire bulk of the building all together. So I would like, I think I'm probably in the minority there, but I just want to voice my view on that. Very excited to keep the open yard requirement, but maybe discuss reducing it and being able to extra count a roof yard space. There shouldn't be a limit on what you can count on that as long as the structure can hold it. So that in the future, I would be okay with the max 1 parking. I would like to still build in the in lieu fee, and we could have that in lieu fee start at 0 for a certain period of time and then be able to adjust that if we needed to. I really like the idea of this being, if we do eliminate the language of the trial period, of it being truly adaptive and as Councilmember Jordan suggests, looking at it much more often and being able to do adjustments. But I'm not sure what that does to a developer. Are they waiting until there are more incentives, or waiting because things change so often that maybe something else will be thrown in and something else better? So I'm not sure what that does to incentivizing the actual development. And those are my thoughts at this point. And thank you.
Councilmember Jordan.
So I already ran through those. I think I realized I missed the unbundling. And so unbundling is kind of stuck in with all my toolkits on max on site and now an in lieu fee of 0 and unbundling. So I'm also okay with the unbundling, but I think, you know, I listed through these before, so I guess we'll eventually vote on each one of these. But the one I'm willing definitely to compromise on is the open yard one, keeping that open yard requirement as long as we can at the same time allow for roof use as open yard in excess of the 20 by 20 cap that's in place right now. So I'll leave it to you to decide next steps or how you want to move forward.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. Just as one more, for the open yard, if I can come back in a later package to with adaptive reuse of a property, if that is what makes the difference between being able to do that and make that residential or not, then I would be okay having that be an incentive for repurposing space so that we can start infilling into some of those. But I'll leave that up to staff if staff can come back with that in our later package or not, or if there's will hear from the ordinance committee as well.
Okay, thank you. I have my reservations about the 45 feet, or I'm sorry, making it 48 feet. I feel more comfortable making it 45. I'm supportive of having the yards so that people have a space to kind of go outside their living quarters. Obviously, I'd like to hear the rest of the councilors' input on this, but as of right now, is there any ordinance committee members that would like to make a motion or move this forward?
Chair Gutierrez, do we have enough of a consensus on the items? It sounds like we do, and if
yes, yeah. I believe so.
Is there a slide queued up to go through those one by one? There's a couple of them where I think are just yeses or maybe no's, but at least one, if not two of them are changes to both how it started and the recommendation that came up from Planning Commission.
Mr. Four, I think if you pull up slide 8, it would help with the motion.
And then Chair Gutierrez, would we want to make motions and vote on each item individually, or is this, or is a package?
I believe that individually would be better since each of us seem to have stipulations on the items.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ford, slide 8, please. There we go.
You just want somebody to jump off the edge of the pool?
Take turns.
Okay, so I'll move that we add the high density with the priority housing overlay in the CBD, but I can't remember, they might have shown that high density to go over to the opposite side of the street on Chapala and Anacapa also. Same with the open yard. So I would limit it to the original map that staff provided to the Planning Commission, to where it is down the center of the street on Chapala and Anacapa.
Second, and with the additional comment that when it is possible to address the historic districts, that continue to move forward in the second phase.
Okay. Motion made by Council Member Jordan and seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon. Is there any further discussion on that? Ms. Brooks?
Mr. Chair, I apologize for interrupting. I think it wasn't clear to me on the motion by Councilmember Jordan in the reference to the map and the density changes. We were proposing adding high density and priority housing overlay within the entire CBD. I think the map you might be referring to from Planning Commission had a different line drawn for where the open yard exemption would apply.
Okay.
Maybe you had said it all. Maybe it was two separate things. I thought you were referring to the line of the priority housing overlay when you mentioned the Anacapa.
No, I was worried that they also recommended the overlay go to the opposite side, the western side of Chapala and the eastern side of Anacapa. I couldn't remember. So if it doesn't, my intent of the motion was what you provided initially.
Our map presented last week of Central Business District with high density and priority overlay in the entire area, except for Brinkerhoff. That remains medium high. Yes, okay, thank you.
Councilmember Jordan, Mr. Forr is having some technical difficulties, but he was going to bring that map up in just a second for you.
Well, I'm okay. I've got too many stacks of paper on my desk here. I just couldn't remember if that open yard recommendation from Planning Commission was also made in the overlay. So my motion would be exactly as Ms. Brooke outlined her map and what was originally provided.
Okay. Are we ready to vote on that, or should we go through all of them? We have to vote on that motion first. Madam Clerk,
Yes.
are you? Yeah.
Yes. On the motion by Councilmember Jordan, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Snedden. Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
Councilmember Snedden.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Snedden, I apologize. Chair Gutierrez.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
I'll tag a couple more up until I get exhausted and then hand off to you. So I would move that we increase the height from 45 to 48 in the downtown area, plus the CG and the MC zones. It's gonna die, huh?
I don't hear any support on that.
Okay.
I'll move that we continue with the 45 height limit in these zones. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm sure we'll revisit it when we get to the FAR part in the second phase, but at this stage. But the motion will just be to not increase the height limit.
I'll second that. So motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Snedden, seconded by Chair Gutierrez.
I'll just, as part of discussion, just reiterate for the future discussion that the time now versus the time before the inclusionary ordinance was adopted, we're maintaining the same height, and I think the situation on the ground has changed as a result of that, both in terms of the ability to attract market rate people that are subsidizing the affordable units, and the ability to just make any of the units with a livable ceiling height. So we'll all get another opportunity to discuss that amongst all 7 of us.
Yes. Madam
Ready for the
Clerk.
vote? Mayor Pro Tem Snedden.
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan.
No.
And Chair Gutierrez.
Aye. So that passes.
Motion carries.
I'll do one more.
Go
So
ahead.
I'd move that we This is going to be like a messy motion of the year. We,
Maintain.
okay, that'd be a good word, but I want to counter that one, of course. So I'd move that we maintain the open yard requirements as currently found in the ordinance, provided that rooftop open yard space can be used to meet that requirement.
Second.
Okay.
And then if it could be further.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, were you not?
No, go ahead. I was just remembering too, this one we definitely want to bring back from the, away from the west side of Chapala and away from the east side of Anacapa and make that line down the center of the street as the recommendation was originally sent to Planning Commission. Sorry, go ahead.
Second. I'll second that. And then with just the note that I think we could look at eliminating the open yard requirement if a building is to be repurposed, and we could look at that later, but I just wanted to make that note.
Okay, let the record show that Councilmember Jordan made the motion and it was seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon. Just as a point of clarity, can you just re-explain, you're suggesting that the 3 feet open yard will not apply if they want to do a rooftop garden?
I'm saying we will recommend that the requirements for open yard remain the same as they are currently, as long as the developer is allowed to meet that requirement with rooftop open yard space. So right now you can only meet that requirement up to 400 square feet, 20 by 20. But they obviously have buildings with many more square footage on the top. So we will keep the open yard requirement as it is, but allow that requirement to be met on the roof.
Okay. I believe we're ready. Madam Clerk.
For the third motion, Councilmember Jordan.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon.
Yes.
And Chair Gutierrez.
Aye. That passes. On
Thank you.
to the next.
So I'm hesitant to take a stab on the next one without help from Mr. Dayton.
Mr. Dayton, are you available? Maybe you can get us started while he runs back. Oh, there he is.
So Mr. Dayton, so the way I kind of see this one is some kind of kitchen sink one where you roll up the in lieu at 0, the unbundling, and the concept of max of 1 on-site space per, right?
Yeah, I think the way you would phrase it is it's a maximum and a minimum provision of 1 space per unit with an in lieu fee set at 0 for any reduction from 1 space.
That covers all of those pretty well?
Yeah, and then the unbundling would be separate.
Okay, so I'll move what Mr. Dayton explained as the motion.
Second.
Okay, let the record show that Councilmember Jordan made a motion and it was seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon. I believe we're ready for a vote.
Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon.
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
And Chair Gutierrez.
Aye.
Very good.
Thank you. That passes. Now on to the last item.
Well, there's more than one. So
More.
you want me to keep going?
Oh, sorry. Yes, go ahead.
So I'd also move that, my notes are really bad here, but the parking requirement can be leased separately in what's called unbundling.
Second.
Okay, motion made by Councilmember Jordan, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon. I believe we're ready for the vote.
Councilmember Jordan,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon,
Yes.
and Chair Gutierrez.
Aye.
Thank you.
And then I'll also move that the reference to a sunsetting either by date or unit count of the AUD program be stricken.
I'm not quite there yet. I think that this needs
Okay.
further discussion of what that means. And this adaptive, as you're saying, coming back more often, and the metrics for how we're measuring. I agree we need to move out of a sort of constant trial period language. And I think it does chill things, but I'm not sure I'm quite all the way to embrace and say, this is it.
Do you want to punt it up to council for discussion and
do.
just not make a decision on that? Because I know it'll be a healthy discussion no matter what we say, how we vote. So I'm okay with that.
I can make that motion that we
Okay.
Continue the discussion of the trial period limit. Defer that to council.
Okay, I'll second that.
Okay, motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, seconded by Councilmember Jordan. I'll agree. Madam Clerk.
Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon,
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan,
Yes.
and Chair Gutierrez.
Aye.
Thank you.
Then the last one I have on my list is that findings and determination section. So I need some help with Mr. Colon on what, if something's needed there, if it's needed there, why it's needed there, maybe.
Hi, Chair Gutierrez and Council Member Jordan. So Section 1 is currently included in the ordinance that you're moving forward. So the only thing that you would need to do is if you wanted to strike it, then that would be a motion. But otherwise, you can just move forward.
So no action would leave it there.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what I'm in favor with. And I think I see Councilmember Sneddon nodding too, and everybody's okay. So all of mine are off my list. If anybody sees that we've missed one, or if staff sees we've missed one, this would be the time to speak up.
Seeing none. Okay.
All right.
You, Councilmember Jordan, and I believe that ends this meeting of the Ordinance Committee, unless there's anything else. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you at 2 o'clock.